I've always loved history, in particular American history, because America. But in particular, in that, I always really found the American Civil War to be very fascinating. So much so that when I was in college, that's what I majored in American history, military history, and wrote my senior thesis on the Civil War. It's just one of those things I always found so interesting. It's just such a strange conflict, because it wasn't just about North versus South and slave versus free. Because you read about and you hear about all these stories of brothers fighting against brothers, and the fact that 55 of the 60 major commanding generals on either side, North or South, they came from West Point. It's just this idea that the country was so divided, right? And that there were Virginians fighting for the North, and there were folks from Pennsylvania fighting for the South. And it's just such a strange kind of thing. Of course, if you study the Civil War, you know it all about it. You know that one of the key figures in this time, maybe, the key figure, was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, and seemingly is a pretty odd choice to be president during this period of crisis. But I think you could make the case, I would anyway. I'm a little partial. He might be my favorite, but he might have been the greatest president that our country's seen, in terms of what he went through and the kind of struggles and the division and the turmoil that the country was going through, and to find a way to not even hold it together, but to get through on the other side, and make it. That's pretty remarkable, honestly. But I find Lincoln's story itself so fascinating, because Lincoln, he came from really humble beginnings. He was raised in a log cabin in the Kentucky-Indiana frontier. His family was very poor. He eventually became a lawyer, practiced out in the country, made his way eventually into the House of Representatives, and then went back into law and just bounced back and forth until he was really thrust in the national spotlight in 1858. So in 1858, of course, we're on the eve of the Civil War. The tensions and the strife and the political struggles that were dividing our country were very present and very unresolved in the late 1850s. And there was an open Senate seat in the state of Illinois. And it came down to the key figure of the Democratic Party, Stephen Douglas, was running. He was free for the states to decide how they wanted to handle the issue of slavery. And of course, the Republican platform, they were looking for a candidate, and they settled on this, gangly, scrawny-looking country lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. And so on June 16th, 1858, they nominated Lincoln to be the Republican candidate for the Illinois Senate seat in the U.S. Senate. Which then sparked this series of what they called the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which, if you are looking for something fun to read, maybe not fun, something historical to read, you can go back and read those. You can find it online. Just Google it. You're probably not going to, but that's okay. Lincoln-Douglas debates got Lincoln a lot of national public attention, but his first speech that kind of sparked everything off came on June 16th, 1858. That night that he was nominated, he gave this rather famous or infamous speech called the House Divided speech. And in it, he said, he quoted actually a pretty well-known guy in his own right. He quoted Jesus. That was a joke. He actually did quote Jesus. That's true. He quoted Jesus, and he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Lincoln continued, he said, "It's not my fear that the union, that our country should cease to exist." He says, it's not my concern the house is going to fall. My concern is that the house is going to go one way or the other. Is that we can't exist half slave and half free. Is that it's going to go either all slave or it's going to go all free. And as a country, we have to make a decision. As a country, we have to make a moral choice who we are going to be. Scholars look back at that moment and they say that 1858 House Divided speech, it lost Lincoln the 1858 Senate campaign. It lost him that election, but it won him the presidency. And I think one of the things that's so fascinating about that particular speech is the way that Lincoln understood the words of Jesus. Quoting Jesus in the Gospels, you can find it in Mark 3, where Jesus is saying that a house divided against itself can't stand. He's not saying this in kind of like a religious instructive way. He's just naming what he would probably say is a self-evident truth about reality. That when there is division, the household, or whatever kind of group of people or organization or kingdom or whatever, it just simply won't continue. It won't continue to exist. It will fall. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I think it's been helpful for me to think about the Civil War and that time period in American history, given our current time period in American history. So you know that like we're coming up on an election cycle right now. I mean, we're less than a month away from Election Day right now, and it's just such a contentious time. I mean, just doesn't really matter who your political preference is, what your political party is. I mean, just our country's so divided. There's so much anger, there's so much frustration, there's just a general lack of civility and an inability to publicly dialogue about anything. So it seems like so much in our country, everything is pushed to the extremes and to the poles, and just like we can't even begin to have a meaningful conversation. So much disunity, so much division, so much disconnection. And I think for us, you know, maybe we look at it as the church, right? And we say, well, what do we do? Where do we fall? How do we live? How do we be a witness in this time? Is there a way? Right? I think that's one of the things that Paul's letter here to the Ephesians is so helpful, is because he offers some really great wisdom. You remember like the first 3 chapters in Ephesians that we've talked about so far is where he's really kind of setting the basis for what he's going to talk about in the last 3. And it's not that he's just trying to get through the dense stuff to get to the good stuff. It's that he's laying the base, right, through prayer and through explaining that individuals are saved by grace through faith. It's a gift that God gives them, and he saves them from the kingdom of darkness to be transferred into the kingdom of light, not just to get to heaven one day when they die, but so that they could do his good works that he prepared in advance for them to do, so that they could live as a new humanity in the world, to live as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation in this world, to mediate his love and his grace and his forgiveness to all kinds of broken people and broken places in our society. And so he lays that base out for us, and then he explains in the second half here more practically what that looks like in people's lives. And so here we go in Ephesians 4. I think this is helpful for us. Starts in verse 1. We'll read verses 1 through 7 today. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. And these are the very words of God. Now, have you ever called the wrong number before? Have you ever had someone call you, but they clearly called the wrong number? I mean, of course you have. It happens all the time, right? Maybe not as much anymore. I feel like cell phones really eliminated a lot of that confusion. Names and caller ID really helps a lot with that. But it still happens sometimes. I mean, now what happens is, maybe this has happened to you, right? It's definitely probably not happened to me very much. You're just sitting around and, you know, maybe you forgot to lock your phone and you sit down and you accidentally dial the last person that you talked to. And then you don't realize that you're having a conversation and they're hearing everything that you say because it was in your pocket. You know what you call that? It's called a butt dial, right? Like, it happens. It happens to the best of us. It happened to me a lot when I was at West Point. Not butt dials, but wrong numbers. So when I was a cadet, my freshman year, you got assigned a phone for your room. It was your own personal desk phone, like a plug it into the wall kind of phone. I know, they existed even not that long ago. I hear they still exist. If you got one, let me know. So you plugged it into the wall, and with all the cadet phones, all you had to do to dial another cadet number was to dial the last 4, like the last 4 extension. And so, you know, I had my extension. It was 3121. In case you were wondering, you can call it, see if you get anything. 3121, and people could call that and they'd get my phone. And so, you know, people call and I answer, Cadet Hopkins, how may I help you, sir, ma'am? Just like that. And one of the things that I began to realize is that people were calling me, and I'd go through my whole spiel, especially as a freshman, got to stay on guard, and people would say, is this the dental office? And I said, no, like I just told you who I was, and I didn't say this is the dental clinic, right? Like, I don't understand the confusion. And they'd be like, okay, I think I got the wrong number. I was like, yeah, I'd say you do. They'd hang up. I'd go back to whatever I was doing. 20 seconds later, get another call back. It's Cadet Hopkins, how may I help you, sir, ma'am? Sorry, got the wrong number again. Click. It's like, I don't understand what's happening. So I did a little research. And what I realized is that the last 4 of my phone number were the same as the last 4 of the dental clinic, right? So here's the thing, is like the first 3 numbers were different, but people just saw the last 4 and that's all they dialed, right? So they were hoping to make a dental appointment, but they were getting me, which is definitely a disappointment. Like, I can't clean your teeth. Like, I might be able to help you with some other, I can't clean your teeth. I'm not going to. Eventually it got to the point where I'd start making appointments for them every now and then. You know, if I was feeling real spicy or a little rebellious, they call and I'd be like, okay, how's next Tuesday at 10 o'clock work for you? Like, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, good, see you then. I don't know if they ever made it to their appointment or not. They didn't show up at my room. I know that. I don't know if they showed up at the dental clinic or not. I'm assuming they did. Can't tell you what happened. To make matters even worse is that the officer in charge of the dental clinic, the dentist in charge of the clinic, his name was Colonel Hopkins. This is like layers of confusion upon confusion upon confusion. But I got a lot of calls that were like the wrong calls when I was a cadet. A lot of people who were trying to get someone else or trying to get a different service or trying to get something else, but they weren't, but instead they got me. Now, Paul says something really interesting here in Ephesians. He says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. In Romans, Paul says that when God calls somebody, he doesn't get the wrong number. When God calls a person, he says that call is irrevocable. God doesn't butt dial, and he doesn't make mistakes. And like, we all have heard calling used in this idea of like, I have a particular calling, right? Like, my calling is to preach and to teach and to disciple people. Like, that's my calling, to develop people in leadership and to, help lead organization. Like, that's my calling. Other people have a different call. Maybe you're called to be a teacher. Maybe you're called to be a doctor. Maybe you're called to be a stay-at-home parent. Maybe you're called to do all different, just be a grandparent. In different seasons of your life, that can change. And that's true, right? That's not what Paul's talking about here. What he's saying here in Ephesians is that all of us have a common calling. And that common calling is to union with God. It is an invitation to relationship with him. It is why Jesus begins his ministry and he says, follow me. Or he said, come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden. Or he said, trust in God, trust also in me. It's the invitation to live a life in relationship with God. That is the calling that all people have. This isn't just for Christians, this is for all people. All people that God created in his image, they have an invitation, a calling to live life with him. So Paul starts there. And I think one of the things that's very interesting to me is that we have to remember that Paul's not just talking to you, he's talking to all y'all. Remember, the letter to the Ephesians is a letter that Paul is writing from a prison cell to a church. It's to a gathered group of followers of Jesus. He's writing this to a church. And so when he says remember to live the life that y'all were called to live. Remember, as like a new humanity, as a kingdom of priests, as a people who are a witness to the world, reflecting God's, his majesty and his glory and his love and his presence into the world and reflecting the world's praises back to him. And one of the things I think that's so fascinating as I look at it is that Paul's making a very interesting claim. He's saying that the default in human life is to live a life unworthy of the calling you've received. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to tell people to do it, right? As he says, he makes a point. He says, make sure you live a life worthy of the calling that you've received. Most of the time we don't. Like, that's his point, is that we live a life that's unworthy. We live a life that falls short. We live a life that we might say misses the mark. If you remember back a few weeks ago, we talked about this idea of sin and what it actually means in the New Testament. How it's not just a matter of not following the rules or behaving in the wrong way so that God is just waiting to kind of give you the cosmic slap on the wrist with the ruler of justice. No, I guess that's not it. Sin is about missing the mark, that there is a mark, a target that God has in mind for humanity. It is we see it lived out in the person of Jesus. This is this central target, right, of who we are called to be and what we're called to do in the world, right? To live fully like this charge that he gives to Adam in the very beginning in Genesis, to be fruitful and multiply, to reign and rule with stewardship and wisdom and grace and kindness and love and peace and patience, gentleness, fruitfulness, all these things, to live and reign with that in the world, to exercise God-given authority with humility, in a world that needs that, and needs good wisdom and leadership. That's the calling, the basic kind of thing set out before human beings, the mark, the target. And so we see then, like, sin is just when we miss the mark, right? So sure, there's some behavioral things, but it's not just what you do. I mean, it's in your thoughts, it's in your intentions, it's in your motivations. And I think when we define sin in that way, one of the things that's helpful for me anyway, is that it becomes less about me following a list of rules and more about me recognizing in humility that I'm not going to be perfect enough. Like, I'm not going to hit that mark perfectly, ever. Like, it's not that you don't try, it's not that you don't put in any kind of effort. You'll see in a minute, that's quite the opposite. But it's this idea that, man, yeah, really, I've fallen short. And you know what? So have you. Like Paul says in Romans 3, all have sinned, all have missed the mark and fallen short of the glory of God. That's the point. It's not just about not following rules. And I just want you to hear that, because I think a lot of people get so bogged down when we talk about sin. It's been used in so many different ways and means so many different things to different people. But that's the picture that we have in the New Testament of what it's actually looking like. And one of the things that we see about sin is that what sin ultimately does, it produces death. I mean, Paul says the wages of sin, the consequences of sin is death. But death of what? Well, at a very basic level, it produces a death in relationships, right? Like, we were created to be in relationships with each other, with other human beings, with God. We were created for relationship and for community. And what sin does is separates us. It separates us from God. It separates us from other people, because with both of those relationships, what do? We sin, we feel ashamed, we feel embarrassed, so we hide, we cover up, we protect, we feel shame. But it also separates us from ourselves, right? To what we might call living a disintegrated life. The opposite of that would be to live a life with integrity, a life that is whole, a life that is unified, a life where your intentions are also your actions, your thoughts become what you do. What you want to be is who you actually are. You see the difference here. And one of the things that we see is that God is doing, that Paul's saying, is that he's building a new humanity, right? He's building a humanity, a group of people that through relationship with him, as they come to him, they live out of a relationship with him, they receive his spirit, they receive power in their lives to do what they can't do through direct effort on their own. We call that grace. One of the things that becomes important is this idea of unity. What Paul says, unity. It's an important virtue of having some kind of unified purpose, vision, shared life together. He says it like this. He says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And then the very next thing he says is he kind of explains why unity or oneness is important. He says, because there is one body, there is one church, there is one Spirit, one hope, one faith, one Lord, one Father. You see the picture? It goes back to this, an old Jewish prayer. It's called the Shema. It was a Hebrew prayer that was prayed at least 3 times a day, often much more. It comes from Deuteronomy. It goes like, you've probably heard it before. It's, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the Shema. There's that central idea in the Shema is that your God is one. So Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad means one. It was such a central idea for the Jewish people, the unity of God. That then when you take this understanding of the Trinity, that you know, I think it elaborates and expands that even in a fuller sense. That here is this great mystery at the center of the cosmos, Father, Son, and Spirit, too many to be one, but too one to be many. You might have to go back and listen to that again. There is unity at the center of creation itself, a unity that is rooted in love, a unity that is itself love. And Paul is saying for us as followers of Jesus in the church, we need to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit, as he explains. And so I think for us an important point is that unity is something God cares about. God cares about unity for us as individuals, right? Remember that salvation, that word salvation, it means wholeness. Really, in the Greek, the very general sense is it means wholeness. It means being put together. It means what was broken has been mended. It means integrity. That, like, you're put together. You were one. It means that you would have oneness with yourself, kind of like what we talked about a minute ago. That's what happens in individuals, and that as individuals are restored and redeemed and brought together and made whole, which is a lifelong process, and receive and have integrity, that this would then be extended to communities, that communities would be made whole. And groups of people would live with integrity. I mean, they would have a unifying principle to their life, that they would be one, have a shared vision for life, a shared purpose, a shared worldview and language for how to talk about life. They would be one. And interestingly, I think it's something that Jesus prayed about. As a matter of fact, it's something that Jesus prayed about right before his arrest. And it's one of those prayers of Jesus that we might chalk up in the category of one of Jesus' unanswered prayers. I mean, it's just in the not yet, right? I believe pretty strongly this one's going to get answered in fullness one day. But right now, it's in the not yet. Here's what he prayed in John 17. He said, I pray also for those who will believe in me through the apostles' message. He says that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Jesus prayed that his church, his people, would have complete unity. The same kind of unity that is evident in the Trinity would be evident in the lives of followers of Jesus. That Christians would have complete unity. Now, I don't know if you have been around Christians before. Complete unity is probably not the way I would describe what our churches and our communities and our lives generally look like. Would you? I mean, on the way here, like we probably passed, I don't know, at least a dozen churches of more different kinds of denominations than I could probably even pronounce. And I mean, there's just so much difference sometimes, right? I mean, you go back through church history and you see that like almost from the beginning, it's a story about disunity. It's a story about people getting upset and breaking off and forming their own little group over here that's different from this group over here, that's different from that group over there. And we all have our own little distinctive flavors. And sometimes it's honestly not even that big of a deal. Like it's the difference between saying like midnight blue and navy blue. Like what's the difference? I don't know, but apparently there's a difference. It's like we get upset about things like carpet colors or choirs or bands or how we pray or praying in tongues or giving and how much you should give. When should you give? Should you give digitally or should it just be in a bucket? Like, or what should the preacher wear? Should he be wearing a shirt like this? Great shirt for preachers to wear, by the way. LL Bean, thanks. Or should he wear a robe? Or should he be wearing a suit, one of those nice gray suits buttoned up with the tie? I don't. That's cool, but that's just, everybody's different. It's like the church doesn't often look very unified, does it? And it just should maybe cause us to pause. Because Paul seemed to think it was important. Jesus prayed that it would be true. And I think that we see that God cares a lot about it. And as Jesus said, it ultimately wasn't going to be our programs. It wasn't going to be the high quality of our worship services. It wasn't going to be how sharp our digital streams looked. It wasn't going to be how good our YouTube channel was. It wouldn't be our great Facebook or Instagram presence. That it would be the unity in the church. That would be a witness to his truth. That then, when the church is unified, the world will know that you sent Jesus, that God sent Jesus and loved them just as you love me. That's what Jesus said. It was about the unity in the church. And I think here's the problem. Remember that Paul started out and he said, make every effort to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. And we talked about how the default is to live a life that's unworthy of the calling. Well, and then here he says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit. Well, why does he have to say that? It's because the default is disunity. The default is that we would be, because we are inherently selfish and self-centered and concerned about what happens to me and making sure that I get myself taken care of, then we tend to not think about other people. And so what happens? Unity, oneness in any sense, is not there. It's not the default. Unity is not the default. You never drift towards unity. You never get on like the lazy river of life, right? Floating in your tube and just eventually drift into like a nice placid lake that just kind of sits there, right? Like you get in your lazy river tube and you start floating down the river, and then eventually you hit like class 5 rapids or a waterfall. Like one of those things gonna happen. You don't drift towards unity. The world doesn't drift towards peace. You don't believe me? Look in your yard. Look in your garden. Leave it alone for like the next couple years and send me a picture and let me know how it looks. I'm gonna go ahead and make about as close to a guarantee as I can make. It's not going to look more orderly and neat if you just leave it alone. Is it? It's because the world doesn't drift towards peace. The world doesn't drift towards unity. The world doesn't drift towards order. It drifts towards chaos. It's the results of sin, right? Sin breaks the world. When we miss the mark, it breaks the world, and we live in a broken world that just drifts inherently towards chaos and death. That's what God is doing, is he's bringing peace. He's bringing order. He's bringing this Jewish idea of shalom into the world. He's bringing restoration, redemption, and wholeness. And yes, through Jesus, he's bringing unity that's available to all people in all times and all places through the gospel, right? Through his message and through a relationship with him in the Holy Spirit. That's part of the point. And so Paul encourages the Ephesians here to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit. And so the question that I honestly paused with this week as I was thinking about it, that I asked myself, and that I'm going to ask you today, is how you doing with that? How you doing? Are you making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the church? It's a hard thing to do, isn't it? Let me rephrase that slightly. Are you making any effort? Right? Like, I just kind of look at our world today, and honestly, I wonder sometimes if, like, as a general sense, like particularly in the church, like, are we even trying? But remember the point, right? It's not that we're afraid that the house is going to fall. It's that the house it can't live divided. It's going to go one way or the other. And that unity, as Paul says, like real unity, the unity the church needs, it's not just some kind of unity for its own sake, right? It's not just, we just need to be unified. No, what the church needs is a unity of the presence of God, a unity on the presence of God, right? A unity that's rooted in the central core of the Trinity, the very presence of God itself. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace, that our unity would be founded on the person of God and not on anything else, not on our preferences, not on our styles of worship, our unity would be founded on the presence of God. That's what Paul is calling the people to, and he tells them, make every effort. I came across this quote by G.K. Chesterton. He's an English author. I came across this last week, and I'll paraphrase it for you, but essentially what he says is that, it's ordinary men, women, and children, their lives, and the course of their ordinary lives, that alter the destiny of nations. It's where it rises and falls, right? As much as we want to think that it's somewhere out there, it's some result of an election that's going to change the course of our country. I mean, let's face it, right? It's your life, and it's the people around you. It's their life, and it's my life. It's our life together. That's what sets the direction for our culture and for our world and our society. And the picture that Jesus says, like for the church, is that the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. It's the smallest of seeds. When it goes in the ground, it can become the tallest of garden trees, and it can spread like a weed. The kingdom of God is like a little bit of yeast put into a batch of dough. It's very small, but eventually it works its way through the entire batch until the whole dough rises. The church is meant to be that yeast. The church is meant to be that mustard seed. Have we forgotten who we're called to be? Are we living a life worthy of our calling? Are we making every effort as the church to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace? Are we living into this prayer that Jesus prayed for us? Well, I think here's the important reminder for us, is that you can't have unity without love. And you can't have real, selfless, Christ-like love without unity. Unity requires sacrifice. It requires me sacrificing what I want, what I think I need. It requires me sacrificing my own self-interest sometimes for the good of the other. That's love, remember? Love isn't an emotion. I mean, it is, right? But love in the New Testament sense, it's not an emotion at all. It's not about your thoughts or your feelings. Love in the New Testament that Jesus talks about, that love, it's an action. It's what you do with your life. It is the willing and the acting to the good of someone else, not just people that are a little different from you, but even your enemies, to will the good of your enemies without any regard to how that's going to affect you. That's what we see Jesus do on a cross. To care so much more about people who hated him that he was willing to die for them. That is love in the New Testament sense. That is how we achieve unity. Unity requires sacrifice. Unity requires you dying to yourself and to your own preferences. And I'm fully aware that that is not something that we want to do. It's not something that people say, you know what I think I want to do today? I want to die to myself. That sounds fun. It doesn't sound fun. It sounds hard. It sounds painful. But Jesus says that when you come to me, when you follow me, I will give you a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. And if you choose to follow your own ways, if you choose to follow the world's ways, then the weight that will be put on your shoulders will crush you. So come to me and you will find a way of life that is peaceful and restful and truly easy. So you might be wondering, where are you going with this? What does this have to do with my life? Great question. Paul really lists out some ways that we can actually do this, right? I mean, Paul, he's a good dude. Like, he doesn't, he's not trying to just put burdensome commands on people. I mean, he wants to help them live this life of following Jesus. And so he offers them some suggestions. So we have 3 tips from Paul that are more than just tips. I mean, it's really wisdom that's rooted in the gospel of how to live life, seeking this unity of the Spirit. So 3 things from Paul, and then I add a 4th. I think that's okay. I mean, I'm not Paul, but it's my sermon. So we'll go with it. Number 1. One of the things that Paul points out is this idea. He says, and I quote, be completely humble and gentle. And so number 1, pro tip for keeping the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Number 1, hold the door. It's one of those things like you learn as a kid, right? Like, this is an easy way to serve people. It's an easy way to literally let someone else go first. Is like you walk up to a door, you both get there at the same time. Who goes in first? Well, it's something like my parents taught me, like, open the door, pull it open, let someone else go first. It's very simple, right? It was impressed on me too. We went to Philadelphia one time. I was fairly small. I was probably 5 years old, but I loved basketball. And it just so happened that at the time, my favorite team, which was the Los Angeles Lakers, they were playing in Philadelphia. They were playing the 76ers that night. My dad was in town for a conference. He was an internal auditor, so he was there for like an auditing conference. Sounds pretty boring or exciting depending on your mathematical persuasions. So he was in town for an auditing conference. We were staying at the Sheraton in downtown Philadelphia. Pretty nice hotel. They put him up there. As we're going into the hotel, it literally just so happened that's where the Lakers were staying that night. And so as we get to the hotel, right, they're getting off of their, like, I don't know, it wasn't a bus. They're like chartered, stretch Hummers that they probably had. I can't remember. I just remember there were a lot of people and there were a bunch of really tall dudes walking around in suits. They were much bigger than me. So we got to the door, like we had just come back from the spaghetti factory in Philadelphia, and we were like coming in, and I remember this one guy, his name was Eddie Jones. He was a guard for the Lakers. I knew who he was, right? And when we got to the door, he stopped, he opened the door, and he told us to go through. Like, he held the door for my family. My little family from Kingsport, Tennessee, like a guard for the Los Angeles Lakers held the door for us. You know how important that made me feel as like 5-year-old Steve? That made me feel really good. What's the point? It's that holding the door for someone acknowledges that they and where they are going to you in that moment is more important than where you're going. It's what Paul says in Philippians 2. He puts it like this. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. It's literally letting someone else go first. Humility is holding the door. That's number 1. Number 2, slow down. Paul put it like this. He said, be patient. We'll just stop with those 2 words. Our world today is so fast. And people are going all the time. I mean, between the internet and social media and just cell phones, like, we have constant accessibility. You can do something all the time. I mean, I remember as a kid, like, being bored sometimes, like, because there was nothing to do. And like, you'd complain to your parents, like, I'm bored. They say, like, go read a book. Like, you go play outside. It happened, right? But as a culture, like now when I'm bored, you know what? I can get on my phone and I have the global like library of all of human knowledge and a bunch of cat videos at my fingertips. Like, that's a lot. You don't ever have to be bored. But in that process, right, we've lost something, is that we're so fast. We're always going, we're always moving. And Paul says, be patient. Patience requires slowness. In 1 Corinthians 13, when he's describing love, that selfless love of Jesus, he says, love is patient. Love slows down. Have you ever noticed when you read through the Gospels? If you haven't, I'd encourage you to just take a look. Go ahead and check it out. Test me on this one. Jesus always has time for people. Like, as a matter of fact, it actually looks like his disciples get a little upset that he's going so slow sometimes. Like, people around him like, Jesus, can we pick up the pace here? Like, we got stuff to do. Do you have to be going so slow? Jesus is incredibly patient. He's always got time for people. In fact, he almost looks like relaxed, you know? Like, he's just cruising through life. He's not in a hurry. He's not rushing around. No one ever comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, like, my kid's really sick. Can you do something? He's like, oh no, I'm super busy. Like, let me check my schedule. He doesn't do that. You know, he's patient. He's slow. He didn't hop on trains. He didn't take cars. He didn't have his own private jet or helicopter. As a matter of fact, the fastest Jesus ever moves is he rides a boat, like across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus walked through life. Jesus walked through life. Most of us spend most of our time running through life, but Jesus walked. The pace of grace is about 3 miles an hour. You need to slow down. You need to walk. Walk with Jesus. That's number 2. Be patient. Number 3, Paul says this. He says, be patient, slowing down, bearing with one another in love. Quite literally what he says there is put up with difficult people because of love. Like, because you are so concerned about the good of those difficult people, he's like literally put up with them. You know, what do you do with difficult people? Do you get mad at them? Do you yell at them? Do you flip them off? Do you throw stuff at them? What do you do? Do you call them out on social media? Do you blast them in memes? What do you do with difficult people, especially difficult people in the church, right? Paul says, put up with them. Now, there's, I think, at least 2 things that are really important for us. Is number 1, this is kind of my just general plea for you, is try to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. In other words, don't be a difficult person, right? Like, don't make it harder on people around you by being a difficult person. Don't be someone who's super easily offended. Don't live your life as someone who's super particular and has to have things your way. Don't think you're the smartest person in the room. Don't think you're the most important person in the room. If you get the other 2 things right, like if you hold the door for people, if you slow down and you are humble and you are patient, I think the third, that part kind of takes care of itself, right? So maybe put those other 2 things into practice, and then we don't have to worry about you being the difficult person that everyone else has to put up with. But let's assume that you're not, and that what Paul's instruction to you is just to put up with difficult people, to bear with them in love. It doesn't mean that you just give them a free pass and say, no, they can do whatever they want. No, it's just like you acknowledge that they're not going to offend you. Because who has control over that, right? So, I mean, you talk about like this I talk about with my girls and like trying to coach them on this, and they say like, you made me upset. It's like, no, I may have done some things that would incline you towards anger, but at the end of the day, right, like you have a choice as a person. Like, at the end of the day, you can choose to be offended or not. You can live a life that is unoffendable. I think one of the amazing things like we see with Jesus is that he did. One of the things that's like impressive about the early church is that they also took that trait and characteristic and they lived it out. I mean, how else could you explain like being willing to be martyred and fed to lions for your faith if you couldn't live an unoffendable life? So 3 things from Paul. Hold the door. Be completely humble and gentle. Number 2, slow down. Be patient. Take your time. Cut some things out of your schedule. You don't have to be busy. Busyness is not a virtue. And number 3 is put up with people. Don't put them down. Don't disparage them. Don't say how dumb they are. Don't say how bad they are. Put up with people. Encourage them. Lift them up. Pray for difficult people. Love them. Will their good. And even when they're being a total jerk, will their good. Love them. Number 4, this is my own addition. This isn't Paul. But I think this comes from Jesus, and I think it's pretty good. It says, when Jesus prayed that great prayer in John 17, that prayer for unity, that prayer that we looked at together, this is what we hear. It says, when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. After Jesus prayed this great prayer for unity in the church, that the church would be one as he and the Father are one, that the church would have the unity of the Trinity rooted in their life, Jesus left Jerusalem. He crossed the Kidron Valley onto the Mount of Olives, and there he went to a little garden called Gethsemane. Gethsemane was the garden of the olive press, right? It's where they made olive oil there. There was an olive grove. They pressed the olives into oil. And in that garden that night, Jesus prayed. Jesus, knowing the trial that was before him, like the literal trial, knowing his arrest and his trial and his abuse and the crucifixion that was going to follow and his own death, knowing that that was coming, he prayed. He said, Father, if there's another way, I'll take it, but not my will, but yours be done. Sometimes you got to cross the valley and go to the place where the people that you know hate you are going to be. You got to cross the valley and go to where your enemies are. And you got to get on your face and you have to say, Father, not my will, but your will be done. The battle and the great victory of the cross isn't really won on Calvary, it's won in Gethsemane. Because Jesus in that moment, he surrenders to the Father. And when Jesus surrenders to the Father, like he is committed, he is all in on doing whatever the Father commands in that time. And he wins that war in prayer on his face before God, long before he gets to the cross. And as I look at our world today, honestly, like this is what we need. We need more people, more Christians, more followers of Jesus, more people who say they are Christians to actually live this out. To go to people who are different from them, who think different from them, and not to just lob verbal hand grenades at them, but to in humility hold the door for them, to be patient with them, to lift them up and encourage them, to pray for the good that they see and encourage them in those places, to say, Father, not my will, but your will be done in this person's life, to have such a clarity of your calling that you would live such a life worthy of the calling you've received, to live as a kingdom of priests in this world, to be interceding for people for God, right? In this world, that they would be changed by your presence with them. Cross the valley. Go into that place and pray, not my will, Father, but yours be done. And Paul closes with this idea. He says, but to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. You're never going to be able to do this on your own. You're just not going to be able to. It's not going to be something that like you're going to be able to just put these 4 principles into practice and you're going to crush it. Like, I mean, if you do those 4 things, like I think it will really help you. But the reason that it will help you is because as you do those 4 things, as you hold the door for people, you humble yourself and you put other people's needs first. You hold the door, you slow down, you lift people up, and you cross the valleys in your life. As you do those 4 things, you receive grace. Right? You receive God's power at work in you to do what you could not do through your own direct effort. As you do those 4 things, you die to your own needs, your own wants, some of your own preferences, your own calendar, and you put God first, and you put other people first. And you would love them in the way that Jesus instructs. In the Shema, right, that prayer for unity is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, and love your neighbor and even your enemy as yourself. And you need grace to do it. And so as we close out today, I just want to pray for you, maybe wherever you find yourself, maybe if you don't really know about Jesus, or you're not really sure that you trust him, or you're just kind of exploring life in relationship with God, I'd like to pray for you. I'd also like to pray for those of us who maybe have been following Jesus for a while, to remember our calling and to make every effort to keep unity, to receive grace, because it really and truly is not something that you can do on our own, right? And to remember that it's not a unity that's primarily about just us being united, as in being in the same place and like calling it unity, because that's not real unity. It's a unity that takes our focus off of ourselves and fixes it on Jesus. That's where real unity is found. So I'd like to pray for you. So you would just open your hands and And let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your word. I thank you for Jesus, who teaches and lives and gives an example of and ultimately dies on a cross for the unity that you speak of. God, you are too one to be many and too many to be one. In the Trinity, help us to see an example of the kind of unity that you would have us experience in our lives. A unity with you and a unity with other people. For those of us who maybe aren't quite sure where we fall in relation to you, maybe who are struggling with different aspects of faith or have doubts or questions, maybe don't know that they've ever trusted you, I pray that they would receive your grace, they'd be filled with wisdom and revelation, that they would be rooted and established in love, that they would live a life that would be open to and aware of the calling that you're issuing them, this calling to follow me, this calling to come to me, this calling to surrender control of their own lives so that they could find the real life that you offer. And for those of us who maybe have done that and have been trying to do that in the course of our lives, I pray that you would encourage us and give us grace to keep the unity of the Spirit, to truly be humble, to put others first, to hold the door for people in our lives. Give us eyes to see those people in those places where we can put others first and hold the door. Give us grace to slow down. Give us grace to live. Give us grace to love. Give us grace to lift people up and not put them down, to bear with one another in genuine love. And give us grace to cross the valley, to go into those hard places, those difficult places, those places of Gethsemane's, and to surrender our will to you. Not my will, Lord, but yours be done. We know that you're faithful, we know that you're good, and we love you and we worship you and we bless you today. For it is in the name of the blessed Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit that we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks for joining us this week, guys. If there's anything that I can do to help you, please do let me know. A couple things I just want to remind you of as we close out our time together today. One, like, comment, share, do something with this post. Like, it's a big help to us, and I think it would, if you like what you saw here today, share it. I think that'd be really cool. Second thing is I'd love to get connected with you, so either comment or DM us on social media, send us an email, let us know how we can serve you. You can fill out our contact card, which should be on a link in this post. That's something I'd just love to get in touch with you and let you know, or help you take whatever next steps you feel like you are being led to take. And then the third thing that I'd say is for those of you who continue to give and support Kendricks Creek during this time, thank you. I'm super grateful for it. It's been a huge blessing for us as a church to be able to minister to people in our community still, and just to be able to do stuff like this. So thank you for that. If you do want to make a gift, you can send checks or cash. That works. No pigeons. We don't take those. Send that to our church, the physical building. You can look on our website and get the address. You also, if you do want to come to our in-person services, there are Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. At our facility. There's some rules, like as far as what we can do just because of COVID, and it's weird. So please reach out and let us know. Like if you're not plugged into our community, then that'd be a great time to sign up for our email list where we put out all that information. So encourage you to do that. We are back to in-person services and still doing this digital stuff too. And then you can also give online. KendricksCreek.org, go to the online giving link, or text the word Kendricks Creek to 77977. Follow the prompts, it'll take it away from there. And man, I'm just so grateful for you, for who you've been called to be, the calling that you've received. Remember, God doesn't butt dial. He's invited you into an incredible relationship with himself. It's not a mistake. And so live a life worthy of that calling. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Praying for you today. God bless you. I love you. Y'all have a great week. Make a great day. We'll catch you next time.